FX Medicine has moved to a new home as FX Medicine by BioCeuticals, with the same trusted content you love, now on a platform that's even easier and more dynamic to use. We're here to support your natural medicine journey, and by signing, you could win an exclusive education pack with wireless headphones, notepad, and a charger. I'll see you at bioceuticals.com.au/education. FX Medicine by BioCeuticals. Hi, and welcome to FX Medicine, where we bring you the latest in evidence-based integrative, functional, and complementary medicine. FX Medicine acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia where we live and work, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. With us today is Kira Sutherland, a naturopathic sports nutritionist to some of the world's best athletes. Kira lectures and mentors upcoming practitioners in the field of sports nutrition. Using her 25 plus years of clinical experience, she has combined her knowledge of naturopathic medicine with education in sports nutrition to create a truly holistic approach to optimizing performance for athletes and those striving for optimum health, especially women. Today, we will be discussing metabolism in women over 40 and will, amongst many things, cover insulin resistance, muscle optimization, and the role of leptin in more details. Welcome to FX Medicine, Kira. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, so excited to be here. Always fun.
Awesome. Now, I would love to play a fun game today so we can really bring this information to life. And as we're chatting today, let's just keep in mind a case. Her name is Jane. She's a woman in her late 40s. She's come to see you because she feels stressed and tired. She's put on 6 kilos without changing her diet or exercise too much. The weight is primarily around her belly. She's been to see her GP. She's done some bloods and she's been told, your thyroid is fine, your triglycerides are borderline, and just focus on doing some more exercise.
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
So exactly, that's right. Now, metabolic dysfunction underpins so many clinical presentations, and today I want to dive into 3 key areas. The first is the more familiar role of insulin resistance. Then we'll discuss what the research is highlighting in the area of muscle and mitochondrial health. And then finally, let's take a look at the role of leptin and its role in metabolism. But to get us started, Kira, what is involved in metabolism and what do we mean when we say metabolic dysfunction?
Oh my gosh. What is involved in metabolism? Like the way I describe it to clients really is, how our body burns its fuel, which I know all the clinicians know, but they forget that there's the breakdown of you have your resting energy expenditure or your basal metabolic rate, which is, us lying around doing nothing and how many calories per day we're burning. We have our incidental movement as well as our chosen movement. So our exercise, energy expenditure through exercise, which is what we have the biggest control over, we think, when we go into the research. It's quite interesting on that. And then we have your TEF, or your thermic effect of food, which is actually how much energy or how many calories you burn to actually have your digestive function happening. So when we eat foods, there is an energy expenditure there, and all of those coupled together really equal our whole metabolic processes. Metabolic dysfunction, literally what is going wrong with your metabolism, but there's so many different levels to what could be going wrong, whether it's, I think the biggest one we look at is there insulin resistance? Is there thyroid issues? I think metabolic dysfunction, in science, we would just be saying things are going wrong. I'm going to make this simple. Things are going wrong that aren't enabling a flow of good metabolism. I mean, that's obvious, but is it leptin resistance? Is it glucose impairment? Is it, thyroid, hypothalamic issue? There's so many things that add to metabolic dysfunction pancreatic issue. There's, I think it's more about what is happening with our client that is causing that dysfunction.
Yeah, I think for, as clinicians, it's a bit like, metabolic dysfunction is like finding the needle in the haystack. There are so many different variables in this space that it's almost impossible to say it's one thing. And I think it's like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle when we're talking metabolism. And that's why I really want to deep dive into these three key areas today around metabolism. But when we're looking at metabolic health biomarkers, what kind of things can we be assessing in clinical practice?
Well, if a client shows up with a blood test, the things that I'm most excited to see would be a whole thyroid panel, not just TSH, because you do want to see what that, amazing little gland is doing or not doing.
Yeah.
You often are lucky enough to get, or you can order yourself, HbA1c. So looking at their overall, what is their blood glucose sitting at overall over the couple months?
Yeah.
You could look at fasting glucose. You can also look at fasting insulin, although that's a bit hard to get out of GPs sometimes.
Yeah.
Looking at triglycerides is another interesting marker. Overall cholesterol. What am I? Oh, so waist circumference biomarkers. I do put people onto a bioimpedance scale. I know the research shows there's a big variability, but as long as you have a person on the same scale, at the same time of day, in the same hydration status, and if it's a female or those assigned female at birth, you want them, if they're menstruating, you want them in the same part of the cycle for the testing. So as long as you control those variables, I want body weight, body fat, or percentage of body fat. I want lean body mass, or, in effect, what their muscle mass is, because that's going to tell me a lot as well, or I'm going to do some calculations on it. And usually in a bioimpedance, or you could send somebody for a more accurate DEXA scan for the same info. It's also going to give you your basal metabolic rate, or an estimate of how many calories that person is going to burn just from their basal metabolic rate, which gives you great, they're not perfect numbers, but it gives you an amazing starting point, rather than just, sometimes I see clinicians that aren't even looking at calories. And I'm not saying they have to calorie count with every client, but they're not even giving people a ballpark. And truly, people don't like this. And there's 80 other factors, but truly, calories in versus calories out is part of the equation, and we cannot ignore that in weight loss. And people don't like to hear it, but it is absolutely true. And looking at some of the new drugs coming in, having great, that are actually having great results, it is about people consuming less calories. That's when we get down to it. It's different mechanisms, but it truly is. They're intaking almost a quarter less food than they normally do on those drugs.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think a lot of people will come in and see you and they'll have, a blood test from, 12 months ago or what have you. And I know it's not current up to date, but you can get a good look at the trend of their fasting glucose or the trend of their basic biomarkers. And, there's nothing like the waist circumference, I find, as just being such low-hanging fruit for people.
It is. And I think, as clinicians, we do a lot of testing these days, and it does really help us pinpoint what's going on. But with a lot of my weight loss clients, besides the visible measurables or putting them on a scale, doing your measurements, waist measurement, I do other measurements as well. It's such a great starting point. I'm actually not a test first. I'm a go after it with some great principles. And then if I get stuck or if I have that need, I'm a test second. And I know not everyone agrees with that, but I just find so many people show up and they've already tried so many things and spent so much money and so many tests. I prefer to change things about their diet and lifestyle first to get that. And then if I need to bring in parameters of testing, or I'm a huge fan of continual blood glucose monitors.
Yes, we were
So
coupled.
they can see the results themselves. So, because I know I can look at the tests and I can see what's going on, but they don't have that great understanding of what the tests mean. And I know we can explain it to them.
Yeah.
But if you give them a continual blood glucose monitor, if you get them on an app tracking, here's my other measurable. I get people to track their food and their intake and their energy expenditure. And so they're actually seeing what they're doing. Obviously, if you have an eating disorder situation or eating disorder in the past, you wouldn't get them to do that if it's going to be a trigger. But I want to talk more general today.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Now let's deep dive into our first area of focus, which is insulin resistance. Can you just briefly give us an understanding of what insulin resistance is?
Oh, sure. So, I mean, most of us, hopefully, as clinicians, we all know what insulin is doing in the body. But when we're actually looking at insulin resistance, we're looking at an issue where there's going to start being troubles with like increasing blood sugar. So insulin helps control the amount of sugar in the blood. We got to think of it that way.
Okay.
And with insulin resistance, the body's cells are not responding in the correct way to the insulin produced. So we then have this problem where glucose is having trouble entering the cells, and then we have a buildup of blood glucose, or, we have a buildup of glucose in the bloodstream, which then has a cascade of a bunch of damaging effects in the body.
Yeah, perfect. And I want to talk about, assessment or the use of things like a continuous glucose monitor or a glucose tolerance test. What's your preference here, and what numbers are you wanting to see? For example, if you asked a patient to do a glucose tolerance test with glucose and insulin, what numbers do you want them to be below on those metrics?
I have to say, I actually tend to just use continual blood glucose monitors because, I like to know someone's HbA1c, which is kind of their long-term, what their blood glucose has been sitting at.
Yeah.
And really, what are we hoping for? We're hoping for, the medical model has kind of different opinions. I prefer, if someone's sitting in the 5s, I'm pretty happy with that. We start getting a little bit worried when it's hitting the 6s. I don't know. What numbers do you look for?
Yeah, I'm a bit fussy. I like it below 5.5 on a HbA1c to be optimal. I mean, we are coming from that optimal health sort of angle. But I would love to pick your brains on the continuous glucose monitor because I just finished 2 weeks on it. I do it really regularly and I do love it. But what are you looking for, for the levels to be fasting or after food? Like, what are your sort of boundaries with the CGM?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because I'm finding everybody has really different opinions and we all react differently to different foods. Yeah. And then we react again, at a different time of day, we have different reactions. People don't talk about this a lot. I have talked about it in a couple of lectures I've given. Our insulin works better in the morning through till early afternoon. And then once you hit 2 or 3 p.m., your cells, even without having insulin resistance, your cells are not as responsive to insulin, or your insulin doesn't work as well. I don't actually know which way to say that. And so we have bigger blood glucose responses to foods once we hit afternoon and evening, which is where everybody is messing up their food intake as well. Most people that you deal with in weight loss are eating really well in the morning and lunchtime. Come the afternoon and evening, there's a much bigger drive for processed foods, sugary, fatty foods. And, some studies say we eat 30% of our calories after dinner.
Wow.
And we're backloading food exactly when our digestive system circadian rhythm is turned down. So our leptin, people forget that the digestive system has this beautiful circadian rhythm, very strong at the morning and lunchtime, and it starts to go to sleep with the sun. Ayurvedic, I know I'm going a little bit alternative here, but Ayurvedic medicine has always talked about your digestive system going to sleep with the sun. And it's that whole eat more in the morning and lunchtime. which of course I'm segueing here, but people doing intermittent fasting, everybody chooses to fast in the morning and eat more at night. And I'm completely want the opposite direction of eating for people. So yeah, back to blood glucose monitors. There's so many factors to take into account. I was actually just listening to somebody else's lecture on blood glucose and cortisol, and depending on our body type, if we're looking at our, epigenetics, our phenotype, our chronobiology, we actually have we all process foods slightly differently, or we have different cortisol spikes during the day, and we have different blood glucose spikes depending on our body type. So I'm still trying to integrate that information in my brain, but it gave me that understanding of why some of my clients are having spikes when I don't expect it. But yeah, okay. So blood glucose, if you're, my brain always goes to working with people with type 1 diabetes, or not that I'm working with them, but I have friends that have type 1. Okay. So a diabetic is always trying to stay between 4 and 8. But if we're looking for optimum health, 8 is considered very high in blood glucose. So look, I'm probably more lenient because everybody's bodies responds differently. I'm really hoping to keep people between 4 to, some people would say 6, some people would say 7, other people are going to get even more strict, but I don't know. I guess I use blood glucose monitors not to force people to stay so tight. I'm using it so they get an understanding of how different foods affect them, because I don't know, Emma, it's like, we know that after you exercise, you can ingest, pure carbohydrate, and you won't have this big glucose spike because your body is making glycogen out of it, and it's attenuating this big blood glucose spike if you're having things during exercise or after. The order of the meal, the order of the macronutrients you're eating is going to affect. There's so many things that affect it, but sometimes I guess I'm a bit looser on numbers. Are you really strict, keeping people down to 6?
Look, I do go in a little bit stricter. I actually don't use 6. Well, for fasting glucose, I would use 6, but then postprandial, I don't really want to see higher than 8. I like to keep it.
That's what I was referring to. I wasn't referring to fasting. Sorry, okay. I was referring to postprandial as well.
Got it. Okay, yeah, because I feel like the continuous glucose monitor is such an incredible tool for intrinsic motivation, for them to learn their own body, and for them to really understand what happens when they eat specific foods, or they have specific patterns. And it's an interesting insight because I've had quite a lot of patients use a CGM that were intermittent fasting, and it's very evident that is not working for them. And I do feel this trend of intermittent fasting, it's very bio-individual, I realize, but maybe for women in this age group in their 40s may not be the first thing for them to try if they're looking to lose weight.
No. And I agree with you. I'm sorry, I wasn't talking fasting numbers for blood glucose just then. I was talking all day numbers.
Okay.
Sorry. So fasting, I definitely want it kept pretty low. But again, you have to realize if they're fasting and then they go exercise, there is going to be a spike because your body, when you start to exercise, your body throws out a bunch of glucose into the system out of the liver to help you. Or if you get really stressed, your body, a stress response is going to put sugar into your system from your liver as well. So I'm agreeing with you on those numbers. And intermittent fasting, I actually think intermittent fasting can be amazing, but it is bio-individual, and I'm not a fan of morning IF for females, especially once they hit 40. Yeah. You're too sensitive to fasting, and I'm not saying you have to eat like right away. Some body types, are fine to not eat until 9 a.m. But what I am against is all morning fasting in females. Yeah. I just think it sets up too high of a cortisol for too long. And I'm absolutely against anybody fasted training and then continuing their fast for a few hours, because that almost sets up what looks like an insulin resistant state in a lot of people. If you exercise and you don't eat for a couple hours, you lose this beautiful metabolic window where your body can deal with carbohydrates really efficiently. Your insulin to your cells is working better after exercise. After exercise is the best time to eat.
Yeah.
And people, I die a million deaths every time I hear people IF, exercise, and then don't eat for 3 more hours. And I'm like,
Or
you're going
maybe,
to create insulin resistance.
yeah, usually throw a coffee in after the exercise, right?
Oh, even before, right? Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I want to talk food as medicine because that is one of my favorite ever topics. And several studies have now highlighted the concept, which you referred to, of meal sequencing and specifically consuming protein and fiber before carbohydrates, which promotes that secretion of GLP-1, a hormone that helps regulate how much insulin is being released. And it also, that hormone has been shown to suppress appetite because it delays the gastric emptying and it helps you feel full for longer. And I read one study looking at, they were type 2 diabetics. They found that eating protein and non-starchy vegetables before carbohydrates led to a 36% lower level of glucose and a 48% lower level of insulin at the 60-minute mark. What's
Isn't that amazing?
it's phenomenal. This food as medicine approach needs to be like our first thing we're doing with patients. But what's your experience in this space?
And what people don't realize is doing that, the food sequencing is similar to how some of these amazing drugs are now working, right? It's like a natural way of, So I'm a huge fan of it. I'm a huge fan of what I generally term protein loading first, especially in the morning at breakfast. That's meant to be really good for the whole day as well. But within a meal, you are doing your, high fiber, which hopefully is your greens, your non-starchy vegetables, and your protein, and then your carbohydrate. And you're meant to also just eat a lot less, slows down that emptying. There's so many things that it's benefiting. It's amazing. And then if you want to include going for a gentle walk after eating, you just have a double effect of, attenuating blood glucose and insulin.
Yeah, I love that. And if we sort of zoom out and we go back to Jane, our patient, let me see if I've got this right from this section. So we would want to check Jane's biomarkers using things like a bioimpedance scale, her weight, her waist circumference.
Yeah.
We'd like to see if she's happy to use a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks to assess her day-to-day glucose patterns. We would advise her to avoid naked carbs by themselves, tell her to eat her protein first, then her high-fiber foods, and then maybe give that 3 months, 3 months, and then see how she's tracking.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to address carbohydrates no matter what. I mean, I'm not there putting everybody on keto or really low-carb diets, but we are needing to look at where people are, a smart application of where to have your starchy carbs or not. And that goes with the meal sequencing, but it also goes with eating after exercise, which is your safer place for your starchy carbs, because it's not like anybody doesn't like starchy carbs.
That's right.
But and if they're not going to use a continual blood glucose monitor, that's fine. They are about $100 Australian for 2 weeks, although I have yet to be able to keep one on for 2 weeks. I knock them off really easily. I have to put like extra tape onto mine. If they're not going to use that, I'm going to use the good old food diary or an app where they're actually entering it in. And I was talking to a bunch of practitioners the other day about this. Weighing and measuring what you're eating, I would say 90% of the practitioners I work with or meet or I teach at university in the undergrad, nobody has ever weighed and measured their food for 2 weeks or even a week. They're like, oh, why would I do that? That's such a nightmare. It's so hard. And I'm like, that's your data. That's actually what you're doing. And it's mind blowing to look at the macro content, the carb, protein, fat content of some of our favorite foods, and especially looking at the calorie load of some of our favorite healthy foods, that in itself, there's actually research that if you do nothing else except track what you eat, you will lose weight.
Yeah, phenomenal, right? It's just the mindfulness. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a million other biochemical things happening, and there's, insulin resistance and leptin resistance and you're fighting the hypothalamus signaling in a lot of things, but it does still come back to a lot of basics. So if Jane is struggling and doesn't have that money, we bring it back to the basics for her of teaching. My big thing is teaching diet and lifestyle, and it sounds so boring and so simple. And as practitioners, we're so used to living a healthier lifestyle. We struggle sometimes, I think, to recommend those because we're like, oh, everybody knows that, but they don't. And I love to use supplements or herbs more as, this is a very bad analogy, but icing on the cake. Yeah. The cake itself, I shouldn't use cake as an analogy here, but cake itself is diet and lifestyle. And then any other things we give are really that frosting or icing, or I can never remember which is American Australian word there. Sorry. You all know what I mean.
Look, I think that expression, you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet is so true. And I think we've got to build a strong foundation before we start layering in fancy supplements. It's a really good point. Now, I wanted to move on to our second area of focus, which is muscle and mitochondria in relation to metabolism. And looking at some research, during the menopausal transition, lean body mass decreases by 0.5% a year, while fat mass increases 1.7% per year. And
I know. It's so depressing.
It is. This loss of muscle puts women at a higher risk for sarcopenia. So can you just tell us, what is sarcopenia? How common is it in women over 40?
Yeah. So sarcopenia is the loss of muscle mass, right? It's you losing muscle, especially in ratio to your body fat, which, all sexes have this issue, but, females and those assigned female at birth have, as we lose estrogen and progesterone, this happens to us more rapidly than men. Also probably because of our loss of DHEA and testosterone, which we don't always factor that in because they're such smaller amounts, but they do factor in. But, estrogen is anabolic. It helps us build muscle. And as we lose estrogen, obviously we lose some of this beautiful assistance or signaling to help support the structure and function of our muscles. So it makes the loss of estrogen makes it harder to grow and maintain muscle mass. And, estrogen as well promotes insulin sensitivity. And so this is one of the issues at menopause is our loss of estrogen is we become more insulin resistant, right? We've already been talking about that. So truly from just a personal perspective and from watching my other clients, menopause is incredibly cruel to the female metabolism. I know that sounds really horrible, but it is a tough, perimenopause is a tough few years or a lot of years for some people. Yeah. Estrogen also helps regulate our hunger and satiety. And so, we literally have everything in the world pushing us towards gaining weight, even though we don't want to be gaining weight, estrogen helps control our cortisol levels, and it helps with calcium absorption and holding it in the body, helps with urinary loss of calcium. So it's, that's the estrogen profile. Progesterone, not so much helping with building muscle, but it is anti-inflammatory. And again, too much inflammation, we all know, causes all kinds of chaos in the body. But progesterone helps with bone density, which is our other big issue as we get into perimenopause, menopause. And progesterone helps with, it calms our nervous system. Yeah. It helps with pain tolerance and stabilizes our connective tissue. So we're also looking at, our issues with collagen and connective tissue and ligaments and tendons. And it's a hormonal chaos happening to our bodies. It's really sad when I think about all those things that you lose. But, so back to muscle, muscle this goes into mitochondria now, which you asked about as well. So mitochondria, quote, powerhouse of the cell. Mitochondria is where we create our aerobic energy. And I think that's what everyone needs to remember. It is where we create, it's where we burn all of our macronutrients. We can burn carbs, proteins, and fats inside the mitochondria. And in aerobic respiration. So I'm sure we're going to hit on mitochondrial health in a minute, but let's go back to muscles. Every muscle cell has hundreds, thousands of mitochondria. As we lose muscle mass, we lose mitochondria. So you're basically losing the engines that burn your fuel. And specifically, it's the only place in the body where we burn fat as a fuel is in the mitochondria. Whereas we can burn carbohydrates inside the cytoplasm of cells in anaerobic respiration. So loss of muscle, loss of mitochondria, loss of your fat burning capacity peak or, levels of it. And so holding muscle mass helps you hold mitochondria. And that's really the biggest thing. And we know that one of the biggest determinants of living to an old age is how much muscle mass you can maintain. There's huge longevity studies going, the more muscle mass you hold, not body fat, but muscle, the longer you'll live. You'll be metabolically healthier.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? And I feel that synopsis of estrogen being anabolic, so the loss of estrogen makes it harder to maintain muscles. And with estrogen promoting insulin sensitivity and regulating satiety, and then we lose progesterone, which is anti-inflammatory, supports our bone mineral density, reduces anxiety, and then we lose muscle, we lose mitochondria, which means we have less fat burning capacity. It's no wonder Jane is walking in our door with an extra 6 kilos on her saying, I haven't really done too much different. What is going on?
Yeah. It's oh my gosh, and the things that damage mitochondria, it's not just the loss of mitochondria. It's like when we start damaging mitochondria, which is happening every moment of every day in a modern lifestyle, you're also then, mitochondria not functioning properly. That leads to metabolism slowing down, not being able to burn fats as easily. We can then have that lead on to non-alcoholic fatty liver issues when the mitochondria aren't coping with the fats in the body, and things that damage the mitochondria.
And I wanted to ask you your clinical experience, because it's something that I hadn't really thought too much about until I was researching this episode. The fact that medications can disrupt mitochondrial cofactors, and then that can impact mitochondrial health. Like, do you see this in clinical practice, and can you talk us through this?
Well, there are PPIs. What else was on that list?
Statins and CoQ10 has some research.
Statins. Yep. Well, the interesting thing with statins is so statins, use up or wipe out or somehow cause problems with CoQ10. And one of the side effects of statins is what's known as exercise intolerance. So you don't feel like you can work out as hard, or you ache more from exercise, or you have a generalized aching of your muscles. Anyway, I actually had a client that this showed up just a week ago, and they were like starting to worry they had fibromyalgia. I'm like, this is not fibromyalgia. This is you being on 2 different statins with nobody supplying CoQ10.
Yeah.
And it's almost instant when you give them CoQ10, how much better they feel. So what's going on there, and a lot of people don't understand, is CoQ10 is one of the cofactors, or one of the important nutrients in the electron transport chain. So if you go back to, aerobic respiration and carbs, proteins, and fats getting burnt in the mitochondria, things first go through the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, and out pop 2 ATP from that. And then things shuttle down to the electron transport chain. And if there are enough cofactors, if the right CoQ10 and other nutrients are there, you will create, from like 1 glucose unit, you are going to create 32 to 34 ATP. Plus the 2 you got out of the Krebs cycle. if there's not enough CoQ10 going on, the electron transport chain is not as efficient, and you don't create as many ATP per unit of fuel that the body was given. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfectly. Yes.
Yeah. Because I think people are like, oh yeah, mitochondrial health is all these nutrients, but it's like, yeah, but what are the nutrients actually doing? And it's like, if you don't have, especially CoQ10 and some of your B vitamins and magnesium and zinc and all these things, if you don't have these things, you literally are making less energy from the same fuel units that you're ingesting. It's like the machine just is not working well.
And so how much protein should women over 40 be consuming to maintain their lean muscle mass? Like, what is the number that we're looking for here?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. The RDA or the RDI for protein, which I've heard is about to get increased, by the way. But the typical RDA or RDI, depending on what country you're in, is 0.75 to 0.8 grams times your body weight in kilos per day. That's to keep you out of protein deficiency. That is nowhere near considered optimum, especially for maintaining muscle mass. And the things that increase your protein need, aging increases protein. There's all this research now coming out on both men and women on that, needing to increase protein to maintain muscle mass. If you exercise, it increases your protein need. And if you want to lose weight, it increases your protein need. And so most of the research, I'm going to be very generalized here, is looking at amounts around 1.5 to 1.8 grams times your body weight in kilos. Some research is even pushing 2 grams and 2.2.
Wow, okay.
Now, again, if somebody has kidney issues, you are going nowhere near those numbers. If someone has kidney issues, they need to talk to their GP and their kidney specialist about what is optimum protein for them. But I won't even give protein amounts for people like that. I make them go back to their specialist. But the lowest I start people on is like 1.5, 1.6. And for a lot of people, that's a lot more than they've ever eaten.
Definitely. I think it's the macronutrient that is the hardest to get in with patients. I have to say it's so much easier to increase carbs or fats.
Carbs are yummy. And so are fats. I mean, proteins are yummy, and you're also fighting against, if people want to be more plant-based, it's very hard to locate protein that doesn't come in combination with a bunch of carbohydrates or, they're very, and I am a huge fan of protein powders and collagen powders because people just struggle. And even in omnivore diets, protein often comes with high fat connected to it. So you need to be careful with that. But I'm constantly talking to people about protein needs. I don't know. What do you start people on? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, look, I try and get them to 1.2 straight away and then we work on, because to me it feels like then they're out of a deficiency state, and then from 1.2 shifting them up. But for a lot of my patients, to get them from, a lot of them are on 0.5. They're really low.
Oh my gosh.
To get them to 1.2 is a big jump. And so then we just do another small tweak from there. But I know that, a lot of people are taking the supplement creatine, and I did want to pick your brains on this.
Sure.
In the space of creatine for metabolic support, is there a validated role? Like, is this a good thing for us to be utilizing in clinical practice?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's only kind of newer research on this. And doing sports nutrition, I'm using creatine all the time. So the idea, and let me go back how creatine works, because 9 out of 10 naturopaths, nutritionists I know don't actually understand what creatine is doing in the body. So your body has creatine stores. Creatine mainly comes in red meats when you're eating it. Especially if you're a plant-based person, there's not a lot of natural creatine in your diet.
True.
So creatine is, when we are doing explosive exercise, so you're doing sprints or you're doing weight training, strength training, you are mainly in the anaerobic profile of creating energy. So not the aerobic, which we were talking about, mitochondria, burning carbs, mainly carbs and fats, but a little bit of protein. When you're in anaerobic, your body is only burning carbohydrates.
Okay.
That's why it hurts more as well, because it's less efficient. For the same unit of fuel, for the same glucose unit, in anaerobic energy, you're only creating 2 ATP, whereas in aerobic, you're creating 32 to 36.
Okay.
But when you're at your top 5% output, like all out sprinting or heavy weights to exhaustion, you are in the you're using phosphocreatine as a fuel. So you are using, it's a bit hard to explain without a diagram, but creatine is used in high energy output to help fuel the body and ATP. I'm not explaining that very well, but just go with me on it.
Yeah.
So the idea is you want a good pool of phosphocreatine in the body so that you can do more sets of weights, or you can do more sprints, so that you can damage more muscle to then lay down more muscle to heal it, and then have bigger muscles, or maintain muscle mass. If we're looking at, this isn't us trying to bulk, this is us trying to maintain muscle mass.
Yeah.
So the idea of taking creatine is you have a bigger pool, and creatine usually comes as creatine monohydrate. You have if you ingest that, you have a bigger pool of phosphocreatine, which helps replenish ATP to be used at this high energy output. Did that make any sense, what I just said, Emma?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
So basically it really helps increase our exercise ability.
Yes. It doesn't make you faster or stronger. It just gives you the fuel for this high end energy output.
Yeah, perfect.
And so the idea of using creatine in weight loss is the idea that, like, just taking creatine when you want to lose weight is a no-go. Like, if you're not exercising, there's no point in supplement. Well, there probably is some biochemical point, but I don't know what that would be. But using it is about assisting you to exercise better and more efficiently, to then create more muscle, to then hold more mitochondria, to then have a better metabolism.
Okay. And what what kind of doses are we talking now?
Right. So I went and actually researched this a little bit for weight loss, because I usually, I use it in sports nutrition.
Yeah.
But the average dosing of creatine goes anywhere. A maintenance dose of creatine is between 1 and 5 grams per day.
Okay.
There were research that was looking at really big dosages, which are called loading dosages of creatine. That didn't seem any more efficient. So from all I could see in the research, they were just talking about 3 to 5 grams of creatine a day over, 10 or 12 week periods.
Okay. Which is quite feasible to take.
It's feasible. Yeah. And look, some of our magnesium supplements that are out there on the market actually have 1 gram of creatine in them.
Nice.
People don't even realize that, but not all of them do by any means. But the thing to be aware of is creatine makes you hold more water.
Yeah.
Holding the creatine molecule holds more water. So some people taking creatine are going to feel really puffy.
Okay.
So you want to play with that dosage, because when someone wants to lose weight and you make them feel puffy with a supplement, sometimes that's, not where they want to be. And other people can have gastrointestinal upset with creatine, depending on what form they're taking. So I always start really low with creatine. I start with just 1 or 2 grams.
Okay.
I see how they feel. And then I go from there. But I see where the research is trying to go. It's not something I've done a lot of. I tend to use it in athletes more than I do when they're in a building phase. It's not actually something, I've read a lot of the research, but it's not something I apply a lot with weight loss, unless I have a plant-based person who I know their creatine is already really low, or typically really low. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you use it a lot?
I don't use it a lot, I've got to say. I mean, I think the research is quite fascinating. And after doing, reading papers for this episode, I'm definitely going to start picking and choosing which patients I feel it could really make a good impact with. But good insight and tip around a plant-based diet would make better use of creatine. So if we kind of zoom out and go back to Jane, our case study, the first step is definitely to educate Jane on how her hormones can impact her muscles and the risk of sarcopenia. We have to get them to understand that and give them that education. And then maybe check if she's taking any medications that might deplete her mitochondrial cofactors and address those. Definitely ensure she's consuming adequate amounts of dietary protein, looking at around 1.5 grams per kilo of body weight, and counsel her how to do this through her diet or the strategic use of, as you said, a good protein or collagen. And then we may consider if there's a research-based supplement like creatine that could be a benefit for her.
Yeah. And going back to the mitochondria, I'm always, with my weight loss clients, looking at mitochondrial nutrients to support, because I just think those are so many amazing cofactors for all kinds of things to do in the body and metabolism that I'm not even looking for, mitochondrial issues. I'm just assuming their mitochondria need help nutrient-wise. I kind of go straight off of that. Yeah.
So you're thinking, things like magnesium, your B vitamins, CoQ10, is that your line of thinking?
Alpha lipoic acid, other antioxidants. Resveratrol has some research, not so much for mitochondria, but for, insulin and leptin issues.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's always this huge list. Carnitine, is a really interesting one for transporting fats through to the mitochondrial membrane. It's actually carnitines or L-carnitine, the amino acid's job to pull fats through to into the mitochondria to be burnt as fuel. And to go back, one of the reasons we want the mitochondria working so well is when we are exercising, which obviously is this huge equation for weight loss.
Yeah.
If you have mitochondrial, issues, what it means is when you're exercising, you pop into anaerobic carb burning more quickly than someone who's really fit, whose mitochondria are working well.
Okay.
And that's an issue so if you have insulin resistance, if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, your mitochondria struggle to burn fuels at the rate you need. And so your body then kind of pops you more into anaerobic carb burning more quickly. And we don't want that, because that's going to make us hungrier.
Yeah.
And it's, and you're not, so the more muscle mass you hold, the better health your mitochondria are, the more metabolic flexibility you have. And we want metabolic flexibility because it means we're more efficient at burning fats as a fuel. That's actually what it comes down to. And I think a lot of people don't connect all those dots.
I think that was a really nice sort of overview of that. And I love that term, metabolic flexibility, and what it means within the body. I think it's a great thing for us to be aiming for. Now, let's move on to our third and final angle on metabolism, which is leptin resistance. So,
oh, yes.
This is a big one, and I've been looking at this space for a number of years now, and I'm still confused by it, and I'm still fascinated by it.
I know.
So leptin is a hormone, and it's a pro-inflammatory cytokine made primarily in white adipose tissues. And, studies report a strong positive association between serum leptin levels and percentage of body fat. So it goes across the bloodstream. It goes into the bloodstream, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and exerts its action on the hypothalamus. Now, if we can just get a little bit of a Kira version of what is leptin resistance.
So we want leptin, right? Leptin I think that's the other thing. We have leptin and ghrelin, and leptin makes, leptin signaling to the hypothalamus, as you said, says, I have enough food. I have satiety.
Mm.
I'm comfortable. I don't need to gain more weight. I'm like, leptin is a great thing if it's working well, right? Whereas ghrelin is the whole, I'm starving, makes you hungry. And with a lot of, continual energy restriction, a lot of weight loss diets, if you're just restricting calories, the problem is, if you're really eating low calories, leptin starts dropping. And ghrelin starts increasing, which is why when people on low calorie diets start having this huge drive to eat more and eat more high fat, high sugar foods, because that's what ghrelin makes us do, because the body thinks it's in a famine and it's freaking out. So I just want people to get their head around that first, because then we jump to leptin resistance.
Yeah.
And the problem is, for some people, when you hit leptin resistance, it's that the brain isn't getting the right signals from the leptin it's producing. And so the body produces even more leptin. So you end up with these really high leptin levels, yet the leptin isn't telling the brain the right signals.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like the word resistance. It's the brain, the hypothalamus is like resisting the signals from the leptin. I hope I've explained that okay.
Yeah.
So when we have that, we have reduced satiety, we have overconsumption of nutrients, we have increase of body mass when we have the brain basically isn't responding to the leptin produced. That's the overarching what leptin resistance is. Did you want to add anything to that?
No. Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. I was looking further into this and looking at the fact that researchers have been investigating leptin-based therapy for weight loss, so giving people leptin to overcome this, and it absolutely does not work. So
I know.
They were looking at potential angles of leptin sensitizers, and definitely metformin is a leptin sensitizer. There are compounds that restore endogenous leptin signaling, like glucagon, like peptide 1 agonists, have become
which is
recently
the big rage.
Yeah, super popular. And I wanted to talk about this because every second person coming in to see me at the moment is asking what I think of these medications. But I also want to caveat, you mentioned before that we do have natural options, like resveratrol does reduce production of leptin by adipocytes, and withaferin A, which comes from withania, the best herb ever, sensitizes leptin signaling. So we have to remember.
Withania is turning into this like insane do it all, helps us sleep, helps us to I'm surprised we're not on a world shortage of withania, which if we're in North America, everyone calls ashwagandha, right? Just to be clear on that one.
Let's talk through this medical treatment of metabolic dysfunction and weight gain, because semaglutide is also called Ozempic and Wegovy. And look, evidence does show it produces about a 16% loss of body weight. So Jane, our lovely Jane, is going to love the idea of this. And I just wanted to get your insights, your clinical experience in this space, because this is the question that we are, I'm sure, all getting asked at the moment. And I'd love to hear what you think of these medications and, where do we go with this information?
Yeah, it's really interesting because those types of drugs are talking to the hypothalamus, or they're, because of, what they're giving the body, you don't have these drives for hunger and these drives for satiety rich foods. Like it's the average person consumes 25% less calories when they're taking these drugs. And it's seeming to you start to read about them, you're like, oh my God, have they actually, there are side effects to them, absolutely. But it's like they're cheating the system in some ways. And so you're not hungry. Yes, people also have nausea with them, and other problems with their gastrointestinal tract. But it's absolutely shutting down that signal. of hunger and what you're trying to eat. It basically if we talk about adaptive thermogenesis, so when we go on a low calorie diet or when we decrease calories, your body goes, oh my gosh, I'm in a famine. And it starts turning all these things down in your body to turn down your metabolism so that you don't need as many calories. And they're almost looking like they're skirting under triggering the adaptive thermogenesis response. I'm not sure that that's quite true, but it's looking pretty close to that. And so I find that fascinating because there's a lot of different dietary interventions that are also being employed or trialed to try to, you don't want to signal adaptive thermogenesis. And that's an interesting thing. Adaptive thermogenesis is increased energy efficiency. So basically it's the body saying survive on less food, and adaptive thermogenesis triggers you to want to move less. It makes you not want to move as much, and you won't even, incidental movement will even be decreased. So it's interesting looking at those drugs and what signals they're actually interfering with and helping.
And look, I feel like we're just at the beginning, the tip of the iceberg with these medications. Now, I know research is showing through DEXA scans that these people on these drugs are losing equal amounts of muscle and fat. And I think my concern and what I'm saying to patients is, what happens when you go off the drug and you have less muscle mass and your metabolism is lower due to less muscle mass? What then happens? So this is a quick fix, sure. I understand why, Jane, you really want to do this. But what's on the other side? And I think as a society, we're yet to see the data come out around what's on the other side of these medications.
We don't know. And the people that do come off say the rebound can be bad, but that's any weight loss thing we employ, there's always rebound, right? That it's only 20 or 30% of people maintain, the fat loss or the weight loss. And with all dietary interventions, you are going to lose muscle mass because that's just part of the body catabolizing itself. So one of the biggest thing with weight loss is you must move, and you must, no matter your age, you must try to maintain muscle mass, right? Because that's probably the biggest thing. And the other thing we need to realize is when we are smaller, when we have lost 20 or 30 kilos, our resting metabolic rate will be lower, even if you've maintained your muscle mass. Because you're a smaller person, you now get to eat less forever. And nobody does that. Nobody talks about that. And it's when you hit plateaus with, say Jane was working with you and she needed to lose 35 kilos. Once she's 15, 20 kilos down, you better be reconfiguring how many calories she needs overall per day, because she's going to get to a point where her original calorie intake is way too high. Even though she was losing weight at that calorie intake, you need to readjust for the readjustment of the resting, metabolic rate.
People do forget that little pearl, don't they? What I would love to know from you, Kira, is what are some naturopathic strategies to treat leptin resistance? So leptin resistance is really interesting because it actually goes back to basic naturopathic principles. One of the worst issues with leptin resistance is lack of sleep. Right? So we know that there's problems with blood glucose control and problems with leptin resistance if we're not sleeping sufficient amounts. Exercise is one of your best things for leptin resistance. You also want to decrease someone's overall triglyceride levels, which is usually decreased by getting them to eat less sugar and carbohydrates. So hopefully you've addressed that. Helping with insulin resistance. Let me think. What else is there? Increasing protein. Fancy that. We've already talked about those are basic naturopathic tenets. And then we have things like cinnamon,
Herbally, Gymnema are both used in leptin resistance, and I'm forgetting one or two. What other things are you using?
A low dose berberine, not high dose, but low dose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I do love berberine. Not long term, but has pretty great results. Similar, some clinical trials see it doing the same thing as metformin.
Yeah, which is fascinating. But I do love that caveat, not long term, because of the gut microbiome impact on that.
And gut microbiome, so important. Working on the gut in general helps everything to do with weight loss, helps leptin resistance, helps with insulin, like it, helps with, neurotransmitters and, mental state, everything. Gut health is everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah. And one thing that you said earlier that I think I'm going to make sure that I am a lot better at is actually ensuring that patients are tracking their food and actually doing a week of weighing everything. And I think that changes the perception of they really understand what they're eating. Because I often ask patients to do a food diary for me. And a lot of them are like, I don't want to, use an app or this, that, whatever. And I kind of go, just, here's a template, write it down for me. But that actually is good. But I think the precision of tracking it, even just for a week properly, is going to have a huge benefit long term.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's exhausting. I've done it. I do it to myself twice a year just because I can't ask people otherwise.
Yeah, good.
But it's and I think all practitioners need to get on board with that. We need to be able to do what we ask our clients, you know, and if you've never done it, this is your chance to go and buy a $10 little kitchen scale. I've even contemplated, again, clients don't come face to face anymore. It's all online, but I would even consider buying little $10 scales at the kitchen store and giving them to people in their first appointment. Here's part of your gift pack because it's frightening. We underestimate, I think I've said this, but we underestimate the food we eat by at least 20% per day. And the other thing is the calorie amounts on packaged food. Again, hopefully our clients aren't eating a lot of packaged food, but packaged food, how much is actually in the food versus what is on the label is allowed to have be variable by something like 25% or 20%. Okay. So that bar you're eating actually could have 20% more calories than it said, or it could have 20% less.
That's outrageous, isn't it?
I know, 20%. I could get like a 10% variance should be allowed, but 20 is crazy. Yeah. Did we say resveratrol for leptin? We did too.
Yes.
Okay, just double checking on that one.
Absolutely love resveratrol for leptin. I think that is one of the ones that I've seen clinically working really nicely. Is just the addition of the resveratrol has helped turn things around.
Can we just say though, resveratrol, we're looking more in foods, not red grapes found in wine. Can we talk about alcohol intake and weight loss?
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh my God. That is like the world's biggest no-no for me and my clients and it's no fun, but for the first 6 weeks of a weight loss program, you are on 0 alcohol.
Yeah, I think that's just sensible.
And, because it's also getting in the way of fatty acid metabolism in the liver. And there's links to alcohol intake, as we know. I was looking at how much alcohol they say can lead to alcoholic fatty liver.
Okay.
And in women, 8 alcohol units a week.
Okay.
Much higher incidence of fatty liver. Only 8.
Yeah. I don't think that's a lot.
That's one bottle of wine a week.
Yeah.
There's 7.3 glasses of wine in a bottle. One bottle of wine a week increases that chance.
Yeah. So in other words, if you want to lose weight, you cannot drink alcohol.
No. Eventually, I let people have like 2 units a week.
Yeah.
I'm actually mean on alcohol because I just find it slows everything down, depletes nutrients, and you have terrible willpower the minute you've been drinking.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
And the next day.
There's research on it. There's research, it's in athletes, but there's research about how terribly you eat the minute you put alcohol in your system.
Oh my goodness.
Because you lose inhibition. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Kira, we have talked through so much today, and I really want to thank you for joining us.
Oh, it was awesome. It was actually, as I was saying before we started, I had a good look at a bunch of research before this chat. So it also made me look at a lot of other things in just a little bit of a different light, because weight loss is such a moving target.
It is.
And there's so many interesting things coming in about it. And I think, I think the new drugs, even though I'm a naturopath, are a game changer for some people, but we are going to have to look at the long-term risk and also the side effects, especially to do with gastrointestinal motility. That's kind of frightening.
Thank you everyone for listening today. Don't forget that you can find all the show notes, transcripts and other resources from today's episode on the FX Medicine website. I'm Emma Sutherland. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. This podcast is intended as healthcare practitioner education only, and it is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Make sure you never miss an FX Medicine episode by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.